Zaki his son as your host on this most epic journey through pop culture's past. Hold on to your butts. This is Nostalgia Theater.
Brought to you by the Movie Film Podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. This is the first Nostalgia Theater of 2021, post-pandemic, and I'm here with a very special guest today, Douglas Goldstein. He was a founder of Wizard Entertainment in the 90s, where he edited and wrote Twisted ToyFare Theater, one of my favorite features. He's one of the head writers of Robot Chicken on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, and he is creator of SyFy's new adult animated series Devil May Care, which stars Alan Tudyk and Asif Ali and premiered in February. Doug, thanks for joining me on the show.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
So before we talk about Devil May Care, I wanted to delve into your own history, which, as I told you before we started recording, so much of your creative output in the 90s intersects with the things that sort of shaped my comedic outlook while I was coming up, not only in terms of Wizard magazine, but specifically with ToyFare magazine and ToyFare Theater. So now you were at Wizard pretty much from the jump, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I actually would drive down on the weekends from college to help work on what became the first issue of the magazine. I was actually working out of Gareb Shamus's bedroom.
Wow.
Which I want to stress, he changed his bedroom around to be an office. I usually get weird looks when I say that. But at the time I was going to college for political science, and at first that was fun, but after a while I got really disillusioned, and I was kind of wondering what I would do next. And so I offered to Gareb I could leave college and work for him full time until I cleared my head, took a year or two off, figured out what I want to do with my life. And he said that'd be great because he needed the workers. And it turns out what I wanted to do in my life was stay there and keep working. So that kind of worked out.
When we look at the role of Wizard magazine in terms of like the conversation about comic books in throughout the 90s, but specifically in the early 90s, I look at it like, if not for Wizard blowing the bullhorn for Valiant, that wouldn't have blown up the way it did, and sort of the intersection of the Image creators. Wizard started at the same time as Image. It was, it's funny how, for as much as Wizard was about covering the conversation, it really became the thing driving the conversation, at least as it pertains to comic books.
I don't know if we intended that. And parts of it we regret. I don't want to speak for everybody else, but I think a lot of people say, oh, Image was so popular because of all the coverage in Wizard. And I'm like, what was it? Okay, if you say so. And a lot of people obviously criticize Wizard for fanning the speculative culture that was really driving sales in an empty way. And I mean, maybe. And I feel bad about that as well, because when the speculators left, the market took a huge hit. But we were really just a bunch of friends who wanted to have fun writing about comics and anything else that struck our fancy. And, Gareb, to his credit, kind of let us do whatever. And I'm sure people remember that there's a lot of wise-ass nonsense in there, and lots of jokes and a lot of crass comments, just because that's what we were sitting around doing. I have to think that it was that wise-ass attitude that kind of connected with the readers. And I think when I was there, anybody that suggested that we had undue influence or just like, hey, if we wrote about this, it'd be popular, I personally hated talk like that, because I thought we were presenting comics to the reader. I didn't think we were like a gatekeeper or a ringleader guiding the whole thing.
Yeah.
And, certainly there were things that we wanted people to read. We thought what Jim Shooter was doing at Valiant was incredible.
Right.
And we really wanted people to know, if that resulted in Valiant being, if that resulted in people reading more of it, then great, wonderful.
Right.
But we tried to cover anything that was popular. We weren't trying to poo-poo anything or get in the way of anything, because also we wanted our magazine to sell. And if we filled it only with, stuff that we had personally read ourselves, then I'm sure people would stop reading us.
I'm just, as I'm talking to you, I'm remembering, like you said, I mean, I think there's pluses and minuses, because obviously for the audience of, junior high kids, high school kids, I mean, reading Wizard was like, oh, this is what the cool kids are talking about, right? So there's going to be a little bit of guiding the conversation in that sense, because, well, for many of the people reading, and I'm lumping myself in, it's your first exposure to this stuff. I mean, I first learned about Magnus Robot Fighter from Wizard, but I also first learned about Faust and a Bone, Jeff Smith's Bone from Wizard. So it's like, I mean, to me, that's a net positive. Now, granted, I rushed out to buy Turok #1 on release day. Probably based on Wizard, and Doug, that did not pay for my college. I'm sad to say.
Well, I think we were doing things like the top 10 lists and all that to say what are the hottest comics, and that is it kind of defeats itself, because when we say, hey everybody, this next comic is going to sell out because it's going to be really hot, you're guaranteeing that it's not going to be worth anything, because you're going to make everybody buy it. And if everybody has it, there's no demand. Everyone has it.
Right.
So, I remember X-Men #1 coming out, and whatever it was, it sold millions of copies, and people were buying 5 or 10 or 15 copies, and we were like, what are you doing? You're gonna like lie in a birdcage with that someday. Or if everyone has 10 copies, it can't be worth anything. And if we had a choice between never mentioning prices and the price guide and popularity like that again, or just covering the fun stuff, or not covering the fun stuff, I think we would have stuck with the fun stuff, but that just wasn't what the place was like at the time.
Yeah.
And who knew what it would become? I mean, I remember being at a convention in the 90s, staring at a copy of Tales of Suspense 39, first appearance of Iron Man, who's my favorite guy, and it was like $2,000. And I'm like, that's a lot of money. I don't know if I could justify that. I mean, that's so much money. If I had bought that, what it goes for nowadays is madness, absolute madness. And I wish I could go back and be like, dude, it seems like a lot of money now, but eventually that could be like a fleet of cars or something.
Just drop the 2 bills; it'll be worth it.
Yep, hindsight is 20/20.
One thing I will say about Wizard, and actually this goes to a conversation I just had a couple of months ago. I interviewed Andy Mangels for a piece I wrote for the Chronicle.
Oh yeah,
and man, he wrote the Hollywood Heroes column.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And Doug, I kid you not, my professional career, what I do now is a direct, draw a straight line from me reading that shit when I was a kid and being like, this is friggin' great.
Yeah.
And that's why I do this.
I understand.
That was the first column I would flip to.
It's really, I think the difference between people like you and me and others is that either we believe that there was something to this kind of stuff that we stuck with over more safe traditional careers,
Mm-hmm.
And people that just didn't see it as serious. Like I don't know if I could have planned this. Like obviously, like I said, I went to school for political science, and if Garb had been starting a magazine at that moment, I'd probably still be there. But certainly, well, let's just say certainly when I left college to do this, it's not like my parents were thrilled. They were more worried and horrified.
Yeah.
But we kept doing what we love, and so far we're still eating. So far we're not homeless. Yeah. Knock on wood.
Could you have imagined back then, early 90s, cut to 30 years later, everything you guys were talking about has taken over the mainstream?
I think I never would have guessed it, because who would have guessed? I mean, it's all due to the MCU, really.
Yeah.
Who would have guessed that special effects would have nailed superheroes to this level? Like, I remember when The Matrix came out, we said, wow, that is a movie that superheroes should be. Like when we were there, we were hoping what superhero movies could be someday. And Iron Man hit after, I left Wizard. Mm-hmm. And now, if you don't know the inner workings of Tony Stark's history, you're not a cool person anymore. And that blows my mind, which is awesome. You always hope that people think, this is cool once they get exposed to it, because it's cool. Like we know it's cool. It's awesome. But just people aren't giving it a chance. And if more people gave it a chance, they would love it. And that's kind of what happened.
It is funny because you talk about Iron Man, and I mean, Iron Man was one of those books that I was reading in the 90s, and I tell my kids this. I'm like, in the 90s, ain't nobody reading Iron Man, right? Like you were part of a very select fraternity, and now you could ask a 5-year-old Iron Man's real name, they'd be like, Tony Stark, right?
Yep.
I mean,
and what's his dad's name?
Yeah,
Howard. I
mean, awesome. as we speak, we have on HBO Max, there is a 4-hour Justice League movie, and we are 24 hours away from a TV series about the Falcon and Bucky Barnes. I mean, the geeks have taken over, and tangentially, it feels like it's just wasted on a bunch of people who don't understand how amazing all of this is.
They certainly can't appreciate it. They just think it's the latest in pop culture, but they have no idea what it's like to be, to not go to the popular party and sit reading comic books and say, like, oh, this is awesome. I don't care if I go to the popular party. And for suddenly the rest of the world to finally agree with you, it's pretty great.
It is. Well, so with that, you talk about, sort of being part of an exclusive club in terms of being into this stuff. I mean, to me, that's what Twisted Toy Fair Theater was. I felt like, man, this is being written for me. It's being written for Zaki Hassan because he's going to laugh. And hopefully there were more people than just me. I mean, clearly there were. But, I mean, again, you talk about the genesis of that. I mean, it started in Toy Fair magazine. It was Twisted Mego Theater originally.
Oh, yeah, until we realized that we don't own the rights to the name Mego, so maybe we shouldn't claim to. But I remember in issue 1 of Toy Fair, and maybe I'm misremembering like what issue it was in, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Pat McCallum, the editor-in-chief, made the Spider-Man Conga line.
Yes.
Which he got every Spider-Man figure ever made up to that point, which was a lot, and photographed this massive conga line that went forever. And in order to put it in the magazine, it crossed several pages. Yeah. And for fun, he put word balloons in there and had fun with it. And, every once in a while, like Khan would be in the conga line, and it's like, what are you doing here? Just very silly. And people really responded to that, even though it was a conga line over the letters pages. But it really got a response. And Pat really thought, what else can we do like this that's more fun? And he thought, let's do a comic book presentation with them and tell stories and just have the same kind of dumbass fun. And I remember at the time I was the editor of Toy Fair, and I was complaining to him about the budget because it's like he as editor-in-chief could come up with the ideas, but the individual editors would get yelled at by the upstairs folk if the budget went nuts. And I was like, dude, the budget. And he was like, don't worry about it. Jeez, with the budget already. I'm like, so, I mean, he won the battle, thank God. And the rest is history.
So, what's funny is you uncorked a memory with the Spider-Man conga line, because as soon as you said it, it just came rushing back into my brain because I absolutely, it was like the Sergio Aragones stuff in Mad, where it was like in the margins of the, right. It was, on the sides of the pages and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't do that. Well, there is no Mad magazine anymore, is there?
No, I think they renumbered it as of within the last couple of years, which really, like, a piece of me died when I heard that happened.
Yeah, I assumed that all magazines are gone, thanks to that's what killed Wizard was the internet, where, why read a magazine when everything you wanted to know is there?
Yes.
Online in my bedroom already in 2 minutes instead of waiting, a month to read the magazine. And I kind of assume that all cool magazines are gone. But if Mad is still out there, that's fantastic.
I'll have to look that up, to be honest. I know that they had restarted at least a couple of years ago, but maybe that experiment ended too. But actually, I want to pick up on what you just said as far as sort of the arc of Wizard, both in terms of the guide to comics and the other magazines. I mean, there was, like we said, I mean, there was a moment where it was sort of commanding the conversation, and as you said, it just kind of, as the internet does to many things, it did in Wizard. But at that moment, when I mean, you had Wizard, you had ToyFare, and Anime Insider, and there was a couple other magazines. At that moment, do you think splitting the focus led to the demise? Would it have been better to sort of keep all of those various, the specific areas, keep them in the main magazine?
I see what you're saying. I don't think so. I think that we had more than enough to talk about in Wizard. If we had, and we did keep those fringe elements to a minimum. Like, we still had action figure stuff in the magazine, but then it was like a regular department that took up 2 pages instead of,
Right.
more of what it used to be.
Right.
I really do think that what ended up killing the magazines, and I remember this all going down, is that the internet started to have real content, and it wasn't just like AOL boards and message and stuff like that.
Right.
And there were comic book news websites that were reporting things much faster than we obviously could with a magazine. And that was very frustrating. And a lot of our efforts to get exclusive news and stuff like that were sometimes working. Sometimes we had exclusive news in the magazine, but you couldn't make it seem like that was enough to buy the magazine. And there was the big conversation of us suggesting that we move a lot of our editorial online and connect it to the magazine, which we didn't do because upper management rightly observed that no one was making money off the internet. Like the comic book websites that were breaking news, I'm sure were keeping the 1 or 2 people working on it okay, but an entire company off the website was not going to. I mean, there's graveyards full of companies that thought that they would just be like, oh yeah, advertising will keep our website going, and then just all went out of business.
Right.
So the only thing we would put online was like pricing information to a small extent, and it really just over time replaced the need to buy Wizard every month or ever, apparently.
Yeah.
And it didn't hurt that the speculator boom left. Like, I think a lot of people were also buying the magazine, not because it was fun, but also because they wanted the price guide.
Oh, right. Sure.
And when that became less important, that those people went away. So it was just kind of a bummer. And thankfully, me and the other guys left to do Robot Chicken right before it kind of all obviously came to an end. I think soon after we left, there was a great bit of downsizing, and the secondary magazines like ToyFare were being shut down. And, we'd like to joke that, we left and it all went away. But it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that was like, it really was the most amazing place to work. We were all just a bunch of wise ass friends making a magazine and given a lot of freedom. And I thank God I worked there, because I can't imagine ever finding a situation like that again.
It really, like, when you talk about the rise of similar coverage on the internet, and then we can look at sort of geek culture on the internet. I mean, it feels like, and obviously part of this is just my own nostalgia for that era, but it feels like there was it was just more fun back then, because there was less of like the immediate. It was just friendlier. It just felt friendlier during the Wizard era, if that makes any sense.
I think so. I think what happened while Wizard was out there is that this is just my observation, and I could be wrong, but the comics seemed more real through the 80s and the early 90s because you would have creators on those books for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And that gave them the freedom to really craft these long stories, these characters with personalities that you got to know, and there was a continuity to it in a way that there wasn't before or since. And I don't mean just the idea that one issue Spider-Man would stub his toe, and then 10 years later he'd say, "Oh, remember when we stubbed my toe?" And that's continuity.
Right.
I mean, whatever happened in issue 1 was to be continued, and issue 2 picked it up, and it was one long story.
Right.
And John Byrne's run on Fantastic Four, amazing. What Chris Claremont did with X-Men, amazing. Walt Simonson on Thor. I mean, these really burned these characters in our minds, and you got to know them. And what kind of happened when Image started up is it all became about the hot moment. Like, creators would come and go, and characters would be killed and come back, and we just kind of lost this feeling that you were visiting an old friend when you picked up the comic with a character that you liked in it. And it was more about, like, clearly that people are just trying to drive sales and come up with the next big event, and everything had to be tied to that event. It seemed more like we were just being pressured to buy comics than just enjoy them.
Yeah.
And I have to admit that I can see where Wizard had a part of that, because we were news and we were trying to drive excitement, and that led to the whole moment by moment excitement of buying things every month. But it's kind of a bummer. I actually haven't read comics in a few years, and I hope some of that has come back, but who knows?
Yeah, I'm with you. I basically fell off the monthly habit about 12, 13 years ago, and so my connection with the hobby is I collect old runs and I have them custom bound into books.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, so that's so literally, like, I just got the Simonson run of Orion and the John Byrne run of the Fourth World. I had them bound into books, and I'm just flipping through, and I'm like, man, for me, it's the nostalgia. It's just looking at the pages and the smell and everything else, and I'm like, in a way, it's kind of nice that, like, I've cut the cord, so I'm like, I don't even need to know what's going on right now, because it does nothing to affect my enjoyment of those older stories.
Yeah.
But like you say, the sort of gatekeeper culture that's sprung up, I mean, that's all unfortunate. But I guess there's a point I'm trying to make in terms of Wizard. It's like, yeah, you can definitely point to, oh, maybe this is a thing that led to this negative outcome or whatever. But overall, and I see this all the time with people online, it's like there's this well of good feeling associated with, oh, I used to read Wizard when I was in high school and when I was in junior high, and that was fun. That was a good time,
I'm really glad to hear that. I never thought it would be some sort of weird cultural thing that people would remember, 10, 15, 20 years later. But I think it's just because, like, we weren't hired to do a job. It's like none of us were working. We weren't working at, like, the latest issue of a knitting magazine or something. Like, we all just loved what we were doing and got to write about it. And I think that connected with the readers who also loved the same material we loved,
right,
and connected that way. And when we went to conventions, we had the best time, because I don't know if you ever saw us at a convention, but we had the Wizard Wheel of Doom, which was also Pat McCallum's idea, where it was this giant spinning wheel, like you see it like a carnival or something, and you would spin it to get prizes, and, like half-issue comic books or whatever. But what you wanted to land on were the physical challenges, where we would still give you a prize if you did a physical challenge, which would be like, go get a sock autographed by so-and-so who's signing right now, and we'll give you a prize. Or, answer this trivia question. And apparently just being online for the wheel, watching that was hilarious. We had the best time doing it. And it was all fun. I mean, none of us thought it was work. It was just all fun. And I'm glad it came through in the pages, and I'm glad people appreciate it that way.
Well, let's talk about Robot Chicken. You mentioned earlier when you made the leap there, and I mean, it sure feels like it's grown from the same DNA that birthed Twisted Toy Fair Theater, but maybe that's my outsider's perspective. I'd love to get your take on how that happened.
Yeah, we were still in that zone when we started Robot Chicken, what happened was, at the time, Matthew Semrich was the editor of ToyFare. And, I mentioned earlier that I was the editor of ToyFare in the beginning.
Yeah.
A lot of us would change jobs and jump back and forth. It was crazy. But when he was the editor of ToyFare, he saw Seth Green on a talk show mention that he liked action figures. And Matt was like, I'm going to call his people and see if we can get an interview. That'd be awesome. And it turned out Seth already knew ToyFare. He read it. He loved ToyFare, Twist ToyFare Theater, the whole thing. We all became friends. He would fly out to New York to join our annual parties, and we would fly out and visit him, and we all had a great time. And I may get the details wrong here, he and his friend Breckenmeyer always wanted to do like a stop-motion series of shorts that were their own little adventures and kind of like a live-action version of what Twisted ToyFare Theater was. Okay. And they already had plans for it. They called it Sweet J Presents, which I'm pretty sure is short for Sweet Jesus Presents, but they never admitted that to me. I don't know why that'd be a secret, but whatever. So I know this now. I didn't know this then, but apparently when you're in Hollywood, you tell everybody your ideas in case one of them catches. And Seth would tell everybody this. And Sony at the time was launching something called Screen Blast, which was a video editing software package for the internet. At a time when the internet wasn't nearly powerful enough to support anything like that. I mean, it just was ahead of its time, and it didn't work. But they paid us to do a series of shorts and said, and we would say that we did it with Screen Blast, and they would put it on the Screen Blast website and so on. So we did that, and that kind of became a material to pitch to the networks to say, hey, look, what if we did this as a series? Okay. And that was Matt and Seth's job. They went around and pitched it. And for a while, Comedy Central was involved. But then 9/11 hit, and people's attitudes towards comedy changed, and it was a whole different world. So that went away. But then Adult Swim said, let's do it. And thank God, because the freedom they gave us was just unbelievable. But so imagine we're still working at Wizard, and Seth says, we got a show. And we're like, really? And we have to move out to LA for this? Okay, great.
Wow.
Because we did Sweet J Presents from New York, and we just wrote it and did the storyboards and sent it all to the West Coast where they animated it. And we were like, oh, we're going to do this in person. That's so great. And I never wanted to leave New York, but for a show, I'm like, that's a good reason to leave New York.
So you're talking like 2000, 2001 when you did Sweet J.
Around there, yeah. I do remember that we left to come here in 2004, the summer of 2004, to do Robot Chicken. So it must have been somewhere in like the two or 3 years before then for Sweet J. So 2001 sounds about right. Or maybe it was before then. I really don't know. I'm getting too old for this. I don't know dates. But, can you imagine a bunch of dumbasses who were just having fun doing Wizard, then all getting in cars, driving across the country together, having the best time, and then you get to LA and you start working on a show? We still had that attitude of we're just a bunch of friends doing something. We weren't like, we are now officially doing a TV show, and television is this time-honored tradition, and blah, blah, blah. We were just like, hey, let's do this. So, and I guess that also resonated with the viewers. Yeah. Thank goodness.
Clearly, because the show has just lasted and lasted. I mean, 200 plus episodes, 15, 16 years it's been on at this point.
Weird. Yeah. It's kind of hard to believe because success was more obvious to us when you're working on a TV show than it was in the magazines because, I felt like the comic book world was growing when we were doing Wizard, but I don't think anyone outside of people who already appreciated comic books got it. Like, no one was like, I hate comics, but I love Wizard. I mean, yeah, Wizard was fun, but we weren't that.
Right.
But here on TV, we had people saying that they liked the show who just happened to watch it. You could be anybody. And that was cool. And I remember we were working on the end of season 1 when they were already airing the beginning of season 1. So we were reviewed by Entertainment Weekly, and they gave us an A. And I was just like, that's weird. That's weird. Because that was really like somebody official just walking into your living room as you're playing video games and fucking around and just saying, well done. And then they leave and you're like, what? I'm just fucking around. What are you talking about? So that was weird. That was weird.
When you think about it, I mean, here's a show where you're able to mine humor from one of my favorite sketches is where Luke is like getting gas and he sees the Wampa like
Yep.
and it's just they're like looking, they lock eyes and the comedic conceit is hilarious enough, but then the fact that you lay on top of it, this is toys that are acting out the scenario. I mean, it's just like it's like multidimensional chess of comedy for me. That sketch.
Well, I have to tell you that Hugh Davidson is the writer who did that sketch, and he was someone who came aboard after the first season. I think we hired him for season 2 or 3, I'll say. And it was so funny because he was hilarious. He could have written a sketch about dirt, and it'd be so funny. And he did not know Star Wars or at all. And so when he would look at it as an outsider and look in, he would come up with the strangest things. And that I believe is one of them. If I'm giving credit to Hugh and someone else wrote that sketch, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure it was him. And like he wrote this other sketch called Dr. Ball.
Yes.
Where he saw that black round droid going to torture Princess Leia, and he's like, what the hell is that? And we're like, well, it's a torture droid. He's like a medical torture droid? Because it has an injection thing. And we're like, I guess. So he's like, well, now he's Dr. Ball. And just made us laugh. So we had a great mix of people who knew the material and funny people that had no idea what they were doing.
I mean, you talk about Entertainment Weekly giving you an A and how that was sort of a pattern interruption, right? And at what point do you realize this, like, you get George Lucas and Mark Hamill and, Seth MacFarlane. Well, Seth MacFarlane, I'm assuming the Seth Green connection probably helps there, right?
True.
But, I mean, the big names, Yeah,
and that was pretty cool. It all happens slowly through, like, this slow growth where I don't think we knew, like, some of the earliest people we got in to do voices on the show were people like Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise, because we did a Cannonball Run thing.
Oh, wow.
And it was just a thrill. And like we had the original voice actor that did Brainy Smurf in the 80s. And we were like, this is so much fun. Like we were picking these like we wanted to meet these people. It's not like the fans demanded it. Like we were like, this is cool. And it slowly grew from there where more current celebrities are coming on board and people that Seth knew. And Seth is so friendly. He could get anybody to do the show. And by the time it got to the point where, like, Tom Hiddleston was doing it and we had the cast of Walking Dead come in and do the whole Walking Dead special, like, it was a slow growth that I don't think anyone ever said, like, hey, today we really broke some barriers. It just slowly happened. Yeah. And I think, like, even when we met George Lucas, the story was we did the Emperor's Phone Call sketch, which is the one where the Emperor's hanging out with some people in his office, and he gets the phone call from Darth Vader that the rebellion blew up the Death Star. And the Emperor's like, what? And you kind of just hear his side of the conversation, because if you think about it, that sketch was my idea, because in between episode 4 and 5 of Star Wars, Darth Vader must have gotten some huge promotion because he's Tarkin's right-hand man. And
Tarkin's kicking him around.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And when you come back to Empire, he's running the whole freaking Empire. And you're like, what story did he tell? How did he spin this? And that is something I thought of since I saw, when I was a kid and I saw Empire Strikes Back. So we did that sketch and somebody showed it to George Lucas. Because I don't think George Lucas sits around and watches TV on his own. I think people just bring him things. he thought that was hilarious and wanted to meet us. So we flew up to meet him in San Francisco under those circumstances. So it wasn't even like this important person is moving numbers around on a spreadsheet and has decided that if you worked with him, his numbers would be better. It was more like, that shit was funny. I want to see you. I want to meet. Let's have lunch. And so it never left that we're fucking around kind of attitude, because he was fucking around with us too. And it just stayed fun. I think the only time that I said, holy shit, this has gone too far, was when we won our first Emmy.
Wow.
Like I thought it was cute that we were being nominated, but when we were actually on stage, I couldn't stop saying, holy shit. And I turned to Tom, the other head writer, and I was like, dude, holy shit. And he was like, yeah, holy shit. It was really weird. And then, yeah, I guess maybe we took it more seriously then. I don't know. I don't think so. I just thought it was weird.
What you're describing, it does feel a little bit like the Simpsons effect, where in the beginning it was a little, celebrities weren't necessarily going to show up, whereas obviously the Simpsons is now a badge of honor. Like, I want to do a voice on the Simpsons. I feel like Robot Chicken is there now.
I guess so. I hope so. It's very rare that someone turns us down nowadays because they just don't want to do it. Like schedule's an issue.
Sure.
But I remember like years and years and years ago, we'd go for William Shatner and he wasn't interested. And the most recent time we went for him, like 2 years ago, he was like, yes, I do want to do this. But then we did everything we could do to make the schedule work. And after like 2 months of trying to get him in, it just fell apart and it sucked. But but maybe next season we'll get him in. Who knows?
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, totally. I joke with people that there were 3 old men in Hollywood that I wanted to hug when I first came to LA. And I know that sounds weird, but it's vaguely true. And the first one I got access to was Stan Lee. Like, we got Stan Lee in to do voices. And I was there in the control room retyping things to change his lines as he's giving them, having the time of my life. And I told him, I was like, dude, I can trace back the whole trajectory of my life to reading Iron Man. I think it was 168 or 138. I think it's whatever in junior high school. Everything came from that. And, I met my wife and blah, blah, blah. It all goes back to that. And he was like, oh, well, can I borrow $20? And I was like, yes, you can borrow whatever you want from me. That's amazing. And he said he was just kidding, but I was going for a 20. Not too bad. But I asked if I could give him a hug. He said yes. And that was awesome. And I hugged George Lucas. I don't think he said yes. I think he just did it. And I think I freaked him out. And twice I had an opportunity to hug Leonard Nimoy, who was my third old man to hug, but it was never in a situation where it wouldn't have been incredibly rude to try it at the moment. So I never got a chance to hug him before he passed away. But that kind of access of getting these people in, and they would do it. And
that's amazing. Every
once in a while, you would write a sketch that would involve a certain celebrity just because you wanted to meet them.
Right.
And it's weird. It's weird that people do it, and it's great.
Well, let me ask you. I mean, you mentioned George Lucas, one of the 3 old men. My sense from the sketch, where he's at the convention, and he's rides the guy dressed as the Tauntaun. I feel like Lucas got it. He's like, like, this shit is fun. Star Wars is fun, but it's like, don't take it so seriously. I feel like that's where he was at, and I'd love if you could offer a window. And I don't want you to tell tales out of school, but I mean, was he amused by how seriously people take this stuff?
I think the idea that he found people that were just having fun, I feel like that might have been refreshing to him. I mean, we really, when we were with him at the ranch, we literally just sat and had lunch with him at the cafeteria, just shooting the shit. He showed us the archives, and I'm sure he shows everybody the same stuff, but he just seemed so casual about it and so friendly. And I think that was because, the prequels had come out and people were kind of pissed at him for the prequels. and he was just eager to smile. And I remember there was one morning where we were working with him, and a rumor had hit that they were going to do the sequel trilogy.
Okay.
And I asked him when he walked in, I was like, "Is that true?" And he said, "I came out with the prequels and they hated me for it, so I'm not going to do more." And, go back in time, it was completely true. That's when he secretly did all those deals.
Right.
And, looking back, now knowing that he was getting out of the whole thing while he was working with us, it probably was just a big relaxing time for him where he could just do stupid shit and not have the weight of the universe staring at him all the time, on his shoulders. And at that point, he's like a grandpa age, and he's just laughing at grandpa jokes, and it's just fun. I'm gonna stop saying the word fun. I think I've said it too many times.
I mean, I think about this probably more than I should, but I feel, and maybe feeling bad for George Lucas is a phrase that doesn't make any sense because he's sitting on his mountain of money and he's doing fine. But I mean, in the sense of like, he created this thing, and it's just so weird to me that for as much joy as the entire franchise has objectively given the world over literally 50 years, people are just so shitty about it, and it boggles the mind,
Yeah, it is. It's funny that you can say, "Oh my God, this ruined my childhood," and you say that to someone, "You killed my childhood," and
right.
It's like, well, apparently he gave you your childhood in the first place, if that's how you feel about it.
Yeah.
But you're kind of in a no-win situation where you're going to disappoint people no matter what you do. And that being said, what he did was a disappointment. I didn't like them.
Right.
But, they can't really take away how awesome the other movies were.
Exactly.
And who really thought that they would be the same? I mean, he made Star Wars. He still had that, college experimental filmmaker DNA in him. He was very young. The movie clearly was made with $3 to spend. and it was awesome. And, fast forward decades later, you're a different human being. You suddenly have way too much money to spend. Of course, it's not going to be the same kind of thing. I don't envy him. He really, it's a no-win situation. I mean, I do envy him. He's rich.
Right. It's like, I mean, he's doing fine, so it's like shed no tears. But on the other hand, yeah, I've read, people on the internet being like, if I had the chance to George Lucas, I'd tell him, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, why wouldn't you just be like, "Thank you, sir, that I appreciate this great thing." Like, and why not make their day better and not worse? Right? What a weird thing to say, right?
And that's just the freedom the internet gives you for being a dick. I mean, if any one of those guys actually met George Lucas, they'd be like, "Oh my God, George Lucas." They would just, and rightly so. I mean, I can't replace in my mind the Star Wars movies. Like, if they weren't there, our childhood really would have been very different. Like, they really were a huge part of all of our childhoods. And he was a big part of that. He deserves to be thanked for that.
The internet has given a lot of people license to just be awful, which is just a reality. But on that note, talking about being awful, the inner devil, if you will. Look at that. Look at this.
Oh, there's transitions.
I get paid per segue.
That's a segue. Nice, very nice.
Let's talk about Devil May Care. Before I got on with you, I watched the first several episodes so that I could be fully caught up with this. And number one, I don't have cable, so the show had largely escaped my awareness, and I feel like I should apologize to you for that. But I was delighted by how much I was laughing uncontrollably while watching it. So I think that says something.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I'm glad you liked it. And that is really funny how people have cut the cord nowadays. And it's like, how do you measure a show at a time where people don't watch shows? This is weird, but so far so good.
Well, so let's talk about that. The episodes are short, and feel free to correct me. I mean, I feel like this is somewhat new terrain for SyFy, doing adult animation in little bite-sized chunks.
Yes, it totally is. I think I don't do names very well, but there was an executive who had this idea for late night animation a la Adult Swim. And SyFy really is the perfect place for that, because SyFy is all about, and I don't mean to sound like a corporate spokesman, but it's like they're all about thinking different and making these cutting edge, futuristic, unusual shows. So you can see where they, in animation, if they wanted to, just get weird and it would fit their brand. And I guess that's what they did. And it moved. It used to be Saturdays at midnight. Now it's Wednesdays right after Resident Alien.
Okay.
FYI. And
double the two-dick.
Indeed. I mean, you can't get enough of that guy. I think we were just pitching this idea around town at the same time John Cotton, who was running it back then, was looking for more content. And, it's two ships crossing the night. We rammed into each other. And he was like, let's do this. And we were like, yes, sir, let's do this. It's just great timing.
So can you talk about how you came up with the idea for the series?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time dissecting things. Like that I think that Star Wars thing is a great example of me trying to figure things out, of like, why did Darth Vader go from, henchman in Star Wars and suddenly he's in charge in Empire? And I was always bugged by the whole idea of heaven and hell. I'm an atheist, and so I never really bought into the whole, here's the rules, follow them and you go to heaven and so forth. It really, the more I thought about it and tried to make sense of it, the more I thought there must be something going on. And there was one day where a friend of mine told me a story that really got my brain going, where he went to UCLA for screenwriting. And his professor at one time was trying to say that movies come in waves based off what's going on in the cultural zeitgeist of the moment. Like, for instance, in the late 80s, there was a wave of movies where some teenage boy and his older father or grandfather would change bodies.
Right.
Kind of like 18 Again with George Burns, and
vice versa.
There was a lot more, trust me. But I
like father, like son. I know too many of these, clearly.
Yep, exactly. And my friend raised his hand, and he was like, "But sir, I heard that the first one of these movies was greenlit by so-and-so at such and such a studio, and his ex-partner, who now works at a different studio, wanted to screw him over and greenlit a similar movie." And I'm thinking, this is what we do. We come up with these highfalutin ideas to things that are so mundane in reality, just when we don't know all the facts.
Okay.
And so it always bugged me, like, what are all the facts with this heaven and hell thing? And this is, when I first discussed this idea with my producer, it was a lot more mundane. I thought, wouldn't it be funny just to have a send-up of shows like Knight Rider and A-Team, where these cool guys have a problem to solve each week, where someone summoned the devil, and that was how they solved the problem each week, where it's like, hey, devil, these biker gangs are bothering my uncle in his cigarette shop, and the devil's like, all right, I'll deal with this one. And Amanda Miller at PsyOp, who's my producer, said that's awesome, but I don't know if it's enough. Like, maybe after 3 or 4 episodes, people will get tired of that. And I'm like, yeah, I see what you mean. And so I really came down back to this idea of, like, what is the devil's really role? Like, I thought, why do you even call him the devil? Like, is devil a title or something? It like, none of this makes any sense. So one of the first things I did was said, he's not the devil. His name is Devil, and people on Earth call him the devil for some reason that he doesn't understand. And he even has a nameplate on his desk that says just Devil. So when people meet him for the first time, they're like, oh, okay, Devil. And I it's hard for me to remember when I'm working on the show that his name is Devil. He's not the devil. That's always, it gets me tripped up. But so the way I thought of it is, imagine you're God, and you made the universe, and things start growing, and you're like, oh, awesome. I'm going to take some of the shit up to heaven with me and spend all of eternity. If that's what you've done, why would you take anything with you to heaven except the most awesome stuff? Like, you're going to be there in eternity. Like, if a guy comes up and he's awesome, but he makes a little whistling noise out of his nose when he breathes, boom, God doesn't want you. Like, why? Why would he take you? And I figured that's what hell must be. Hell must be his trash bin, where God is getting rid of anything that came out of the universe that he doesn't want to hang with for all time. And that kind of launched it from there. Then I thought, Devil's in charge of it. Why is he in charge of it? Maybe he was an out-of-the-box thinker that God just got tired of and said this was a promotion and don't call me, I'll call you. And then I was thinking, well, my God, what kind of world would hell be if it gets everything that's less than perfect? Like, it must get not just less than perfect people, but every movie that's not good goes down there. Every product that's not good goes down there. And they don't know that that's what hell is for if you're living in hell. And Devil doesn't know. And it seemed like a perfect universe to put a show in. It's kind of like, the way I used to tell people about it is, imagine Devil is the guy that they hired to make the Zune at Microsoft. And he thinks he's making an amazing product. He is having the time of his life.
Right.
And they just hired an intern who used to work at Apple. And the intern knows it's all garbage, but can't say anything because he's just an intern.
Right.
And maybe he's wrong. He doesn't know. So that's the relationship we played off at the core of the show. There's Devil, and there's Beans, his new intern, that for some reason is the one person who's able to see hell for what it is. And I go from there, and it's just been a lot of fun ever since. There's that fun. It's been very fulfilling.
Fulfilling.
Ever since.
Well, you can't spell fulfilling without FUN in there, so that's the way we can think about it.
It's been a satisfying journey ever since.
So the first season is 7 episodes?
7 episodes. They don't greenlight too far in the future for TZGZ is this programming block, which a lot of people said, what does it even mean? And the answer is, if you move the letters in SyFy over 1, SYFY, you get TZGZ. So it comes on after SyFy. It's the whole thing.
Wow. Okay.
As soon as you get it, it's clever. But before someone tells you, you're like, what the hell's going on? But I think it was always, they really just wanted to try out a lot of new stuff. So they weren't greenlighting like these super long seasons for anything, and they still don't.
Right.
But now we're 7 episodes.
So did you have Alan Tudyk in mind from the beginning for the lead? No. The closest I had to, a trick in screenwriting is to cast the movie in your head, and that'll give you that'll give you a direction when you write your characters. It won't just be a complete blank slate. You'll be like, oh, this guy acts just like, Jon Stewart, and suddenly you can work with the Jon Stewart archetype as you're writing your character. Right. But the closest I came to doing that for Devil was Scorpio from The Simpsons. Okay. Where, if you remember the episode, where he's like a James Bond villain, but he's just on another level of thinking. Like, he knows where all the hammock stores are, and he carries sugar loose in his pockets for all good reasons, but you would never think of it. So that was kind of the attitude and the personality that I was thinking of. And I even was like, maybe we should get Al Brooks to do this the same way he did Scorpio. Right. But when we were going over the names, and my casting director said that Alan was available, and this wasn't at first. Like, we went through several names and talked to people first. But when she said that, that was just a moment of silence for the rest of us, and we were like, well, yeah. And we sent him the material, and he liked it, and so there you are. And we just said to him, start with Scorpio when you're coming up with a voice, and he's like, yep, I get it, and he just did it, and suddenly Devil came to life in a way that
I'm like, oh, there he is. There he is. I can hear him. That's really the guy.
Huh.
And it was great.
And he's so good. He's just good in everything, right? I mean, gosh.
Yeah, finally. I mean, when I told my wife that we were going to work with him, she almost teared up. She's like, but he's a leaf on the wind. And I was like, yes, I know. He's a leaf on the wind. He's done great stuff, and I'm glad he seems to finally be recognized for that. Like, he did such a great job in Rogue One, and now this Resident Alien show everyone loves. So it's great.
Well, and with that in mind, Asif Ali, I've been following him forever because, as a brown Muslim guy, we find our representation wherever we can. So he's having kind of a moment too because he was just in WandaVision.
Oh my God, yeah, he's a nerd hero. He was in WandaVision. He was in The Mandalorian for an episode.
That's right.
He's been in other cool stuff that I don't recall, but I remember going to his IMDb page and be like, what? He's in all this? It's crazy. He was a guy who I explained who Beams was to the casting director. Linda Lamontage is her name. I'm probably pronouncing her last name wrong because I'm terrible with names. But what she did is she kind of got back to me with the giant list of people who she thought matched the description I was giving, including stand-up comedians. So his name was on the list. I'd never heard it before. And I pressed play on the video that she sent me, and I closed my eyes and just heard him speak. And after 45 seconds, I'm like, yep, that's Beans. That's him. That's him. And again, he liked the material too. And the rest is a very short history.
Well, hopefully it will be a very long history when the tale is ultimately told, because I hope people do check the show out. Can you once again put out when and where people can watch Devil May Care?
Yes. Wednesdays, 11 o'clock, right after Resident Evil. And
Resident Alien.
Also, I always do that, Resident Alien. It's not my fault. It's been Resident Evil for like 20 years now.
Yeah, it's true.
It's not my fault. And you can also go to like NBC.com and SyFy.com, and I think the first 3 episodes they used to let you watch for free. Maybe now they don't, so I'm not sure. And I'm told we might be on Peacock soon. I don't know.
I was just about to ask. Can people watch it on Peacock? So there you go.
I'm officially not sure.
And Robot Chicken is continuing on?
As far as I know. What Adult Swim does is they spread out the episodes as long as they can. Mm-hmm. So they take their sweet time in renewing us, but they always do. So I'm going to say yes. I'll assume yes.
But until we are told otherwise, we will assume Robot Chicken continues to be part of the pop culture ether. So
please do.
Well, Doug, I want to first of all thank you so much for spending the hour. I had such a blast just shooting the breeze with you, and I hope people do check out the show. And I also, do you have any social media channels where people can follow you if they're so inclined?
I'm on Twitter as Doug_Gold. And if anybody cares to follow me, I'm flattered. They might encounter a little bit more political ranting than they want to hear. But I'm there.
Well, there we go. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Doug Goldstein, for joining us here on the show. And I will catch you all next time. Thanks, folks.